So how do you play Gladiator Beast in Edison format? This isn't necessarily a combo tutorial, as even your longest combo of cats is pretty basic. You summon the cat, you summon these two from your deck, and you tag out the test tiger into Sekidor and you attack. But I do want to talk about some tips and tricks with the Gladiator Beast deck. Something that I touched on in the deck profile is Waboku and Dimensional Prison. How a good opponent will be aware of these and therefore play accordingly. So let's say you're going first, you set 2 back row and you summon a Ready Ari, for example. Here, if your Vayu Turbo opponent would normal summon an Armageddon Knight, they would attack into your Ready Ari and send whatever they want to the graveyard. And even if you were to prison their Armageddon Knight, your Retiari cannot tag out into another Retiari, thus their graveyard card is safe. Or if you were to flip a Waboku, your Retiari does not die and you tag out into a Murmillo and you pop their Armageddon Knight. Even now, your position isn't looking that much better than theirs. So in the case of Ready Ari and 2 back row, your opponent would just summon Armageddon Knight and attack. Because there's not many ways that they can get punished. They could even send down a Necrogardna to the graveyard and use it whenever you try to attack with the Sekitor. So what if you summon something bigger than Armageddon Knight, be it either a Quest or Darius? Here if they summon Armageddon Knight, they're kinda forced to send Necrogardna to the graveyard. And they would only really do this if they have a tuner to convert the Armageddon Knight or a Caius. Because you just attack, they Necro because they have to, otherwise you remove it. And then you do the same thing next turn unless they can actually remove their Armageddon Knight. Your opponent having a low attack body on their field is usually detrimental to them. Because it's something that's free for you to attack into and tag out. Similar to a Gorse, is not very good against a GB deck because that meant a GB connected, and Murmillo just pops it. So let's go back to the scenario where you summon either Darius or a Quest against the Vayu Turbo deck, and they have Armageddon Knight. They will not summon Geddon, but would they summon Dark Grepher? In the case of a Quest, you could argue summoning Grepher, either using the effect or not, but at least attack over it. Now in any of these scenarios, if you do have the Chariot, you obviously just Chariot away their monster and then connect directly for free. However, in this scenario, you just have 2 back rows. So would they attack the Quest here? Probably, because it does run it over. Would they attack Darius? There's a good chance your opponent has to read that you have Waboku face down. Partially because you set 2 on the first turn, but partially also because the deck plays Waboku, right? So a good player would usually not attack with Grepher into Darius, because there's just more cards that punish you, as opposed to doing something else. Or just not attacking at all, and your opponent would just set their own D-Prison, for example, or they would at least bluff that they may have it. Also take into consideration that if your Vayu Turbo opponent sets 1 back row into your Gladiator Beast monster, it's probably something that's either chainable, like an MST for example, or they might have bottomless trap hole, so your bestiary will just get banished. They could even have something like Royal Oppression. So what can we take from this? Well, if you open Darius and Waboku, especially in game 1, maybe you just set the Darius. Let's say you go first. You set Darius, you set Waboku, and you set D-Prison. What's your opponent really going to do? If I saw this, game 1, I would assume it's Vayu Turbo. Because that's just the most common deck that would do something like this turn 1. Let's go back to the Vayu Turbo example. If your opponent has a Armageddon Knight or Grepher, would they even attack here? If they think it's a Raikou face down, you could argue them just summoning a Vayu or a Sirocco that they would have pitched with the Grepher. Or they may summon a Grepher and they do pitch the piece, but then they still heavily play into your Waboku or D-Prison. Mind you, you get to see what they dumped. If they dumped something like Necrogardna, or if they dump a Vayu and a Sirocco piece, you can make your plays based on that. They only play 2 copies of Armageddon Knight, which would be the most punishing card in this scenario, because they would summon Geddon, and they would attack into Darius, and you're kind of forced to use either Waboku or Prison on it. Neither of which is super good, but it's an okay trade. You would probably use Waboku, and then you would tag out this into Ready Ari and banish their card in grave, assuming you have another GB to attack over their Armageddon Knight. If you cannot clear your Geddon, you're kind of forced to tag into something that deals with the Armageddon Knight. Unless you're able to go for the Sekidor Book of Moon play, of course. Another option is that they do not do this at all. They just set 1 back row like an MST and pass. If your opponent sets just 1 MST here, you just flip up the GB, swing, and then you tag out into a Sekidor. And here you maybe set 1 more back row in case they have an MST. But when you can present Sekidor, your opponent's in a really weird position. Because if they attack, you can use Waboku, and you probably just win the game. If they don't attack, you can also just Sekiro attack. If they have a bigger monster, you use Waboku. Or if their field is empty, you resolve the Sekiro. So what I want to get to with this is that sometimes in the GB deck, especially in game 1, it may be worthwhile for you to just set a monster turn 1, instead of summoning it. Because of how the metagame is shaped up, with a set monster usually means a Vayu, or a Raikou, maybe even a Sangan. You can trick your opponent into doing various plays based on them thinking it's something that it's not. Another thing I'd like to touch on is if you have a Gladiator Beast monster on the field and you would like to summon a Bestiary to tag out into Gaiceres. Keep in mind that you can contact Fuse with face down monsters, so you may want to set the Bestiary so you don't play into a bottomless trap hole. Or maybe you do want to summon the Bestiary because you want your opponent to bottomless it. That's usually not the case though, but it's something to think about. Or if you have a Book of Moon in hand, you may actually want to summon the Bestiary, because if they do use bottomless on it, you would much rather book the Bestie, tag out into Gaiceres, as opposed to booking the Gaiceres against their bottomless. If you have a Starlight Road face down, and you have a Gladiator Beast monster and a Test Tiger, instead of just summoning the GB, summon the Test Tiger, retain priority and use its effect to target the quest, it is much better for you to summon the Test Tiger here, and you pass priority, thus allowing your opponent to activate cards like Torrential Tribute. By summoning Test Tiger here and not use its effect on summon, forces your opponent to use the TT here if they would like to remove both of your monsters before you get a tag out, thus allowing you to activate Starlight Road because they're trying to destroy 2 monsters. A simple way to phrase this is just normal summon a quest, okay, summon's cool, summon Test Tiger, I would like to pass priority, would you like to do anything on summon? Say your opponent has a TT and a prison face down, they may be inclined to use TT here, because if you tag out into a Bestiary, they risk losing their prison. And also if they TT Bestiary, Bestiary is in grave, so now if you can tag out into a Darius, then you can just bring back the Bestiary. Do keep in mind that Bestiary's effect to pop a back row is mandatory. So if your opponent doesn't have any, you may have to pop your own. Also, if you summon back a Bestiary with Darius, because Bestiary is mandatory, he will still have to activate. And because of how Darius is worded, it says it's negated by this card. Darius only negates the Bestiary while Darius is face up. So for example, if you Book of Moon the Darius, Bestiary will pop. Also, Bestiary will still pop if you Book of Moon the Bestiary, because of how Book of Moon works with negated effects. If your opponent activates the bottomless trap hole on the Darius' summon, targeting the Bestiary, not sure why they would, but if they do, you do summon the Bestiary and then he activates and resolves negated by Darius. Additionally, if the Darius leaves the field before the monster is summoned, the connection of them is severed. So, for example, the Bestiary does not get shuffled into your deck just because the Darius was bottomless trap hold, because the Darius was banished before he got a chance to resolve. There are so many more things to cover, but this deck is very technical play focused, and a lot of people just deem it as a bad deck because they are unable to pilot it correctly. I hope you guys learned something, either be it a ruling or just how to play this deck in general in Edison format. If you enjoy my content, make sure to also subscribe to my second channel, linked in the description box down below. There I'll be posting more personalized and exclusive content.